Welcome to Your Need to Know. Today we're going to be talking about menstrual equity. Not a term you may have ever heard before, but joining me to explain what it is we're talking about is Holly Siebold, who is the founder of BRAWS, Bringing Resources and Aid to Women's Shelters, and Shaheen Khurana, who sits on the advocacy committee of BRAWS. Thank you, ladies, so much for being here.
Thank you, Catherine.
So let's help define for people what menstrual equity really means. Since you founded BRAWS based on the fact that there was a direct and immediate need to bring services and products to women, how has that now developed into something larger?
Right. Menstrual equity is actually a term that was coined by Jennifer Weiss-Wolf, who actually wrote this book recently called Periods Gone Public, Taking a Stand for Menstrual Equity. And she coined it because she felt like women and girls were not having a fair opportunity for success because of the barriers presented by their periods.
Right, because this is not something you choose. Women and girls have periods.
Right.
And so we're talking about from about the age of 11 to maybe 55, you must manage this. And yet, socially, we don't talk about it. There is a stigma surrounding it that has existed for many years. And because it's something we don't talk about, people don't really see that there is a need to provide this to marginalized populations. That might be women in jails and shelters. That might be low-income women and girls. So Shaheen, tell us a little bit about what the advocacy committee is really attempting to do with this.
So basically there's three aspects, or three main goals would be to expand access across to schools, correctional facilities, and shelters. The second main goal is to make it more affordable. So through elimination of taxes, or also through other means, including it in flex benefits. And then the third goal is also to make them safer. Right now, manufacturers are not required to list any of the ingredients on the packaging at all. So we're actually, through public policy and through legislative initiatives, we are trying to see if we can require manufacturers to put ingredient list on that.
So this seems to, I'm sure for a lot of people, this is going to seem like this came out of nowhere. Like, why are we talking about this now? And so Holly, why are we talking about this now? Why now?
Wow, it's become a national movement. 2015 was the year of the period. Grassroots organizations, activists, women leaders stood up and said that this is not okay anymore, that we need to change public policy so that women and girls have better access to these products, so that they can go to school, that they can get a job, so that it's not going to be a barrier to their success.
So, but Jennifer Weiss-Wolf points out in her book that when she went to do research on this in January of 2015, she found that this was something it's a topic of conversation for third world countries. You're talking about girls in Africa or India or Bangladesh, who are stigmatized, sent to huts, not allowed to go to school. There's all these rituals and beliefs about women who are having their period, but she didn't find anything relevant to the United States.
Right. Right, it's always somebody else's problem. It's a third world issue. It's not something that women and girls are experiencing here in the United States, but it's not true. I mean, right here in Fairfax County and Loudoun County, some of the wealthiest counties in the country, girls are missing school because of their period. They are not able to manage it. We just received a really amazing letter yesterday from a nurse in one of our Manassas Park schools who thanked us for providing menstrual supplies to her clinic, because in the past she didn't have, the students didn't have access to those products, and they would have to be out of class for an hour or two to try to get some products and manage it and replace their clothing if it was ruined, even go home. But she said now that they have these products and are available to hand them out, the girls get their pads and they just go back to class. It's no longer an issue. It's no longer a missed education.
So are we also saying too, and I think a lot has changed since the Women's March in Washington, when like millions of women around the world just stood up and said, I am tired of this, and on so many fronts. But the fact that we have accommodated non-menstruating people by pretending that this doesn't happen has meant that we have not addressed real pressing needs in this country for women and girls. And so, Shaheen, now that the tenor and tone has changed, what are we doing about removing the stigma of actually using these terms?
Right, part of our goal is also collecting more educational resources and building the educational resources around menstruation management, particularly for teens and girls, and then also to try to remove the stigma. So the education piece of it, I think, is missing. So we need to really address that.
Right. BRAWS actually just started a teen leadership council where we've invited elementary school girls, middle school girls, high school girls from the area to come to the office, and we talk about these issues and how we can take that information and educate their peers back in their schools and what they can do to make changes so that when they're growing up without that stigma, they're growing up knowing it's not shameful to have a period.
It's normal. Like,
it's totally
you
normal.
know, people get colds and people have things happen, and you know, and we don't shame somebody for having to blow their nose in class or whatever.
When we go to some of these distribution events, it's the teens. I mean, they're the most embarrassed, you know, and teens and the little girls. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to come, you know, get the pads.
Right, but it's kind of like they weren't born embarrassed. Somebody told them or taught them or made it clear to them they should be embarrassed.
So we have to unlearn all of that.
Absolutely, and I know that your children are very involved, Holly.
Yes.
And it's not been anything for your son. I mean, you are socializing him to think of this as like anything else.
Right. I mean, it's just something that's normal that every woman experiences and every girl experiences. In fact, I have a funny story. My daughter's school was doing a hygiene drive for some local shelters, and they sent home a letter about all the items that were collected in the hygiene drive. And toothpaste, deodorant, shaving cream were all part of this list. But of course, what was missing? Feminine hygiene products. So my daughter, who was 10 years old, went to the school and demanded that they include that on the list. And they did make that change. And those are the changes we want to see other girls creating throughout the country, making sure that their needs are just as much recognized as anybody else's.
I think this is culturally, though, a huge shift in that, you know, family life education, which is contentious in most places, and in some school systems in Virginia and in other states don't even provide family life education, right? And so trying to introduce this idea that there should be age-appropriate information for boys and girls.
Right.
To me, I mean, I can remember being in probably 6th grade PE, and they separated out the boys and the girls, and I'm thinking, why are we doing that? That makes no sense. So is this really truly part of this menstrual equity movement?
Right.
Is to attack all of these things simultaneously?
Right. We believe advocacy and education are key to making changes in the future. I mean, there's still changes we need to make right now with the public policy that exists, but we're hoping that that just dies out on its own as the younger generation moves up and it becomes totally normalized.
I think that's really
Just
key.
talking about it more, I think, and you know, publicly, is going to help.
So do you sense that you've got, in addition to your organization, how about educators? I mean, do you sense that with hygiene drives at elementary schools where you're pressing this issue, pads and tampons need to be put on this list, that you are kind of engaging teachers who are at the front lines of the stigmatization or normalizing that this is something that is normal for girls in the school? Yeah,
we want it to be normal. We want the girls, I mean, ultimately we'd like to have pads and tampons in the bathroom, and they are able to access them on their own, but if they're not there, we want girls to be able to go to their teachers, say, I have my period, I need to go get a pad. And clearly and articulate their needs. I mean, some of the schools that we've talked to have had little pet names for pads and tampons.
That blew my mind.
Yeah,
at the panel that was on Capitol Hill, and one of your teen advocates who's 12, almost 13.
Yes.
Almost 13.
She was adorable.
She was great. And she was saying they make us ask for either a penguin or a turtle.
Right.
I'm like, oh my goodness, that euphemisms and calling it something else should have no place in a school.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, that all age, that's all part of the problem, you know. So using nicknames for basic needs is insane.
Right, that is crazy. And so coming up, so the legislative session is starting in Richmond on January the 10th. And there are bills that have already been drafted and dropped. And so how do you see these committee hearings going? I mean, are you going to be able to find people willing to sit in front of a dais full of people who might be men and talk about menstrual equity and pads and tampons and access? You know, how do you see that rolling out?
I mean, this was all part of our campaign of the last year. We really spent a lot of time raising awareness, so our legislators to the public, really, about these issues, so that when any bills that were introduced in January came about, we would be prepared. So we really, I think we're ready. We've really exposed the public to this issue. There are two bills in particular, three now actually, that are of interest to Virginians. One is HB 24 and the other is HB 25. Both will repeal the sales tax on tampons and pads. And so one is we'll repeal it for the year. The other one is just for back to school weekend, which currently is not part of
the tax-free holiday.
Yeah, it's not part of the tax-free holiday. And then recently, Delegate Corey introduced a bill that would require jails to provide tampons and pads for free to incarcerated women.
And that shouldn't be like something revolutionary, but in fact it is, because only this past year in 2017, at the federal level, Congress actually created public policy in 2017 to make these items available in federal penitentiaries, which begs the question, well, what were they doing before that?
Right. I mean, having them available is one thing, making sure they're being the law is being enforced is another. And so we're hoping that all this exposure really helps the situation for women in jail.
So Shaheen, tell me, how are you going to try to find people specifically to step forward to tell their stories? I mean, I think that's a critical part of the whole advocacy process.
Well, I think as part of BRAWS, we actually go out to all the shelters, and we actually operate in some of the schools too. We do the teen program in schools. So kind of getting, some of the residents from the shelters, correctional facilities. Basically, they did at the Capitol briefing last week. They did a phenomenal job of explaining some of the real issues they faced when they were in prison with getting access to menstrual products.
You're right. That was so effective. It was so effective. And when we get back from this break, I want to talk further about how going forward this Virginia Coalition for Menstrual Equity could use all of our help. Regardless of what gender you are, we all need to be part of the solution. So please come back and join us after this break.
For all the papas out there, let's stop what we're doing and take a moment to be with our kids. They can be loud moments, goofy moments, dorky moments. It doesn't really matter. Every time dads take a moment to be with their kids, it's pretty momentous. So let's all take a moment to make a moment today.
Hey, did you know that 2.4 million loving cats and dogs in shelters and rescues need our help to find a home? Go to theshelterpetproject.org and search your local shelters and rescues. Go for a cuddle with your next best friend. Adopt.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
We cannot be bystanders.
We can stop to make sure someone is okay.
We can warn someone when their drink isn't safe.
And disrupt the situation.
We can.
Get someone the cab.
Or walk them home safely.
We can make campuses safer for our friends.
Our roommates.
Our classmates. Our fellow human beings.
We cannot be bystanders.
We can.
Intervene.
It's on us.
All of us.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
When it comes to saving money,
What?
don't act like a baby.
Oh, it's like they're having their own little meeting.
This is so humiliating.
Be the boss.
I'm the boss.
What the?
Power nap.
You were saying.
And make a budget.
Let's get to work.
Need a little help?
Stacy, read back the notes.
I can't read. What's it say?
Create a personalized savings plan and get other tools and tips.
We can share.
You obviously didn't go to business school.
At feedthepig.org.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and today we're talking about menstrual equity. Joining me are Holly Siebold and Shaheen Khurana of BRAWS, which is bringing resources and aid to women's shelters. Thank you, ladies, so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have been talking about the destigmatization of talking about menstruation and the people who go through this every month, and the fact that we need to normalize the discussion, not only of this issue, but the fact that there are women and girls who need these products every month. So going forward, how do we need to structure the conversation? I know that in New York recently there has been legislation around providing these items in restrooms, in schools, in prisons, and in public places, much the same way that we provide
toilet paper.
Yeah, toilet paper and soap, because that's a requirement. In a public restroom, you're required to have those things.
Right.
So is it a leap? Why should it be a leap to provide these other items?
Well, we're hoping now with 30 women in the Virginia House of Delegates, we should be able to get more traction on some of the bills that we're trying to introduce, legislative actions that we're trying to introduce here. We believe that access to menstrual products is a matter of human dignity and public health, and I think that's how we approach it. Get more of the women senators on board, and actually there's bipartisan support across for some of these issues, so we're hoping to leverage some of that.
Right, in Illinois and in Florida, which are governed by Republican governors, they were able to pass bills that would make feminine hygiene products tax exempt. So we've seen a history in this country in the last year or two where they are making strides to raise awareness and make changes and eliminate barriers for women.
And I think we have every reason to be hopeful. I know you're a big fan of our new governor, Governor-elect Ralph Northam.
Right.
He actually came to one of the events you had in Vienna, and the grand opening of your office space too.
Right, right.
And I think we all decided it's a brave man running for governor who's willing to hold a box of tampons, right?
Right.
For a photo op. But he is a physician, and so for him, I think it wasn't on his radar, and it's not been on because the people in our legislature who've been controlling a lot of the conversation are men.
Yep. Right, whether it's intentional or not, I mean, women's health has just been left off the radar for public policy, and it's particularly this topic in particular. So we're just trying to raise awareness and make sure it's part of the legislation moving forward. We've created a coalition here in Virginia called the Virginia Menstrual Equity Coalition, which I think you mentioned earlier, and that really is, it's going to be a diverse group. It is already a diverse group of organizations throughout the state, and in all different parts of the state as well, not just here in Northern Virginia. We have members who are in Hampton Roads, in Richmond, in Roanoke, and each of them are advocating similarly as we are doing here in Northern Virginia to people who live near them and letting them know that this is an issue and asking for their help and calling their delegates and calling their senators and letting them know to support these bills or introduce legislation that will help bring all these issues to light.
So building awareness through our Facebook page, and going to most of the women's summits all over, and then trying to build awareness there too, just to gather some momentum.
So so there is a Facebook group that people can join, and so people should look for that. They just go to Facebook and look for the group and ask to join the group, and that's where you're going to be doing a lot of your information dissemination.
Right.
I'm assuming too that if people have a story to tell or have a story they want to share or tell, that would be the place to reach out about that.
That would be great.
And then following the bills, and so far we know that there are 3.
Right. Delegate Boysko and Delegate Corey have introduced 2 bills. We have heard that there might be also, the budget hasn't been released yet at this time, but we're hoping that it will be included in the budget, funding that would provide these products to schools and shelters, and if not, a couple of our legislators have said that they would ask for an amendment that would include funding for those products. Whether it happens or not, you never know.
Sometimes it's a long process.
It is a long process. And we had something happen similarly in DC where the DC Council actually did vote to eliminate the sales tax on pads and tampons, so it became law. But then when the governor was when the mayor was putting together the budget, she was unable to include that law into the budget, and so then funding wasn't included. So even though it's passed into law, it wasn't something they were able to operate right away.
It's called an unfunded mandate,
Yeah.
and we can't do that in Virginia. So legislation's not going to be passed
Yeah.
unless there's a
Right.
corollary budget line item or a budget amendment. And because our budget is biennial, Governor McAuliffe is working on the budget that will govern for the next 2 years. So this does become sort of imperative that early on in this legislative session, that if it's not already in the budget, if it hasn't already been negotiated, especially the rollbacks of the tax. If you're going to roll back a tax on pads and tampons, given how expensive they are, how many women use them, and the fact that you're using them every single month.
Right.
You have to figure out, are we putting something in the budget that allows for the fact that we have to cover the loss of that sales tax revenue? And so, I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand how the legislative process works here in Virginia, and the fact that it's not just get the bill passed.
Right.
It's how do you compensate for
exactly.
it?
Exactly. And so, but I do think that there's an opportunity for women across the Commonwealth to reach out to their specific legislator. Legislators care about their constituents.
Yes.
Flat out. And a lot of people think, well, my one phone call, my one email, it's not going to make a difference.
It does matter. And that's what we're really encouraging people who have been following our coalition to do, is really just a contact. We would love to have, right now, both bills are sponsored by Democratic delegates. We would love to have Republicans patron the bill as well, co-patron the bill. And we're reaching out to our members to find constituents in districts that are Republican represented, yes, and having them patron the bill, because we would love to show bipartisan support on any of these issues.
And I think this is a real opportunity for the grassroots activist movement that got 15 new members elected to the House of Delegates to now take that energy and say, how can we press our legislator? And that may be a new legislator, it might be that you didn't get a new legislator, but you can still hold them accountable. And so this is a matter of making the phone call, sending the email, and saying, I'm your constituent, and I would love for you to co-sponsor or co-patron the bill.
That's what we'd love to see, because that makes the bill stronger. The more names that we have on that bill, the more likely it is to
and it really shouldn't be a partisan issue.
Yeah,
right.
It shouldn't be.
Am I right?
Yep, it should be. It's an issue that concerns everybody.
Plus, we want to, Congresswoman Grace Meng has also introduced the bill, which is Menstrual Equity for All Act, and I think, and she also has another bill for encouraging manufacturers to actually label tampons and pads, so the safety bill.
And that's long overdue, because cosmetics have had to put label ingredients. Like used to be there was lead in a lot of lipstick, and then when the manufacturers had to put what was in lipstick, and you're like, oh, we've been putting lead on our mouths. That's not a good thing. But that has not been extended, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The book Periods Gone Public, which is a fantastic book, but Periods Gone Public really talks about how it fell through this gap because of the way it was identified. First it was a medical device or a pseudo-medical device, and then it was cosmetic, and so in between all of that, nothing is on the packaging about whether there's been chlorine used in processing cotton, or whether there's other kinds of artificial ingredients in these things, just nothing there. And people should care about that.
Right.
What we put into our bodies is important.
Right.
Yeah, right?
And so just like on the state level, we are asking people to contact their federal representatives, contact their congressmen and congresswomen, their senators, let them know that they support these two bills that already are out there.
And then Cory Booker's.
And then there's on the Senate side, there is a bill that the Act for Incarcerated Women, and it includes feminine hygiene products as well in that bill, that they should be provided free of charge.
Not just free of charge, but freely available, because what we've heard in that panel, because you had two formerly incarcerated women from the Friends of Guest House who were talking about the fact that the guards play games with these things. You need a pad, well, they'll get to it when they get to it, or you're limited to 3, or if you create, and they demonstrated how they create these
jail tampons.
tampons out of these cheap, flimsy pads. but they can actually, it's considered contraband, and they can be charged.
Right.
They can get into trouble.
They
for
absolutely
that.
can. It can extend their sentence.
Right.
So all of these things are just not in the purview of the general public.
Right.
And it should be, because this is a human rights, civil rights issue for anyone who menstruates. And I will just say, too, here toward the end, one of the things that's covered in the book is that gender nonconforming people and transgender people also menstruate. And so we need to, we talked about, we talk about feminine hygiene products because that's the way all of us were raised, and that's the way marketing has been, feminine hygiene products, but they're actually menstrual hygiene supplies.
Right, we are, and actually to take a step further, we're trying to even remove the word hygiene from the definition, because hygiene has a connotation of dirty, and really these are not, it's, having a period is not a dirty action. It's not something that you should be embarrassed about. It's something that's perfectly normal. So, we're trying to remove the word feminine because not all women have periods, and then the hygiene piece, because it's something that we don't want to.
And I think you have an opportunity. I think we, there's a new vocabulary. I think menstrual equity, as you said, Jennifer Wolf-Weiss. Jennifer Weiss-Wolf is the one who coined the term menstrual equity. So she's now created something we can all have a conversation around.
Right.
But I do think some of the old terms that we've always used could use a rework.
Right. I mean, if you go to the grocery stores and you see them everywhere, it's still listed as feminine hygiene products. It's just something that we all grew up with, and it's going to take some time. I find myself saying feminine hygiene products, and I
default to it too, because it's hard to break your old mental dialogue with yourself.
But I think that's the first step in just recognizing that that's not necessarily what it should be termed anymore, and then just being aware of it and starting to spread the word about that as well.
I think so too, and the fact that we are, the transgender bathroom debate and bills.
Yes.
I don't know where that's going to go. I think one of these days we will have a different configuration of restrooms. You see this in restaurants already.
Yes.
Where they're unisex, single person, common sink sort of thing. But these products should be in every restroom. Every restroom, regardless.
And that's what we encourage our legislators to think about as well.
Well, thank you, ladies, so much. This has been illuminating. I hope it's also been inspiring. I hope all of you will pay attention to this and look for the bills that we are talking about in the 2018 Virginia legislative session, and to reach out to the Virginia Menstrual Equity Coalition's Facebook group. This truly is something that you need to know about.